My friend, the world is ready for your genius now. May not another minute go by without us being able to perceive the brilliance that is you. In other words, I am inviting you to your most latent, your most present, that juiciest part of you that is ready to express with clarity in this world. And through our conversation today, I'm going to offer some perspectives that may clear the way mentally, energetically, physically, whatever way we find. Because I imagine that your unleashing of your genius, your unique genius in this world, is exactly what is needed at this present time. I'm Danielle Lynn. I talk to cool creative geniuses such as yourself. And from my perspective, when you arrive at this particular video, you know that there is something to express in the world, but perhaps you have been a little bit caught up in the brain, in the steps, in the presentation of how it can be. I'm going to invite you to challenge any perceptions that you may have had that have been built on it's going to take a lot of money, it'll take more time, I need to think more, I need to plan more. All of those things are stories. I invite to you the idea that the world responds to embodiment. And sometimes when we embody and put our work out into the world, it may or may not be received immediately the way we envision it would be received. And this can be a very daring thing for any genius to do, because you have in your heart's core this expression that is not just a creative expression. Oftentimes, it's an embodiment of yourself in the world. So sometimes it can feel like the rejection of the vision is a rejection of the core self, as in, is this world even willing, ready, able to embrace me as I am? Must I conform myself to show up in this space? There have been some wonderful conversations I've listened to recently from the creative sage that is Rick Rubin. And this man offers a certain level of philosophy of creativity, which includes simply express yourself in your life. Treat your life as though each day is an entry in a diary. Each creative act is simply the moment's creation being put out in the world. It has no need to be perfect because the next day will be the next step and the next expression. There is this perspective that when you are creating whatever your art is, and art can be used loosely here because your art might be the art of building business. It might be the art of music, painting, dancing, raising a family. It might simply be the art of you living as you are. Whatever art you are putting out into the world, the actual embodiment is during the process of the creating. And then once you put it out in the world, you become the observer along with everyone else, because now it has already been expressed. It is now a creation with its own energy, so to speak. And so when we are in the moment of creation, we're being the creator. And then once it's released, it's complete. The concern about how others will receive or not receive it, that's the game that the mind plays, that the ego plays. It doesn't actually matter as much as we imagine it does. What I find matters more is giving yourself the permission to express. So what if people love it or don't? Perhaps you say, well, so what? It has to do with my money. It has to do with this or that. The most successful business people I have met are willing to take big and small bets on themselves. And not everything they bet on succeeds, so to speak. The thing is, they are willing to take that step to put themselves out there again and again and again, not assuming that either the successes or the failures truly define them, but rather they're just part of the dance and the experience of life. And so, because they're not taking these steps so personally, they have more freedom to actually express and create in this world. And ultimately, isn't this what genius is about? The freedom to express yourself as you are, the permission to allow yourself to embody and move in this world your way. And this is the gift you give yourself when you allow yourself to take the step right now as you are, without requiring the perfection for it to show up, without shaming, blaming, or judging yourself for how it shows up. The permission, the advocacy to breathe yourself into life is one of the greatest gifts I imagine you could give yourself at all. If you were to imagine your younger self, your inspired self, your dream self, and you imagine that you, as the adult right now, are giving that inner self the gift of living a vision, I'm curious, could you imagine anything greater than that? Sometimes we hesitate because we are attached to what we think living that vision will give us. When we feel constricted in the realities that we can imagine, we sometimes place our focus on the scope of our life in the way that we can imagine it, as fully as we can imagine it. But sometimes we get very fixated on a certain presentation of life. Perhaps we've been dreaming a certain dream for a while, and it hasn't come into fruition. And so, some way, somehow, people will sometimes lose a little bit of hope. And they will dull themselves to what's possible because they don't want to get their hopes up and hurt some more. So it can appear to take great heart to put yourself in a scenario where you not only believe, but you perceive that you are indeed the navigator of your reality. Because this also involves a certain level of personal responsibility to your own way of interacting to what's showing up in life. I would invite you to consider that the time of thinking and planning and wondering and waiting is complete. I would invite you to consider that the more you give yourself permission to embody the step that wants to be lived right now, the more you're going to simply enjoy your life and notice the fruits of it. And in this way, you can keep your perception open, your heart open, your mind curious. Certainly, there may be probabilities that are more likely than others, and you can navigate accordingly, knowing those probabilities. But see, this is where the heart comes in. This is where synchronicity comes in. This is where your ability to navigate this world through perception and vibration comes in. You stop shutting down the probabilities because you know how it must be. Instead, you start surfing the probabilities by being curious about what could be. Now you're playing an entirely new game. Now you're in a completely different reality. You were just walking before, and now you can move in all the dimensions. We can sometimes be attached to the idea of what we think we want to receive from living that vision into life. When we do that, we may be actually a little disconnected from what it is we want. Because if you're imagining you must do something to be something, then you are not in the state of actually being it. I'll say that a different way. If you imagine that you must receive accolades in order to be a genuine artist, if you imagine that you have to have a Michelin star restaurant in order for you to be an exemplary cook, if you imagine that these external things must exist first before you're allowed to be it, then you're living in a way where you're constantly one step removed from actually giving yourself permission to embody and live your genius. These things that can happen are a symptom of you living in your genius. If you choose to show up each day knowing that you're magic, life inevitably begins to reflect that to you, no matter how seemingly mundane your actions and day might appear. Magic inevitably shows up. You believe and perceive opportunities always emerging for you, then opportunities will always emerge. Conversely, if you have a perspective that things don't turn out a certain way and you nurture that viewpoint, then that is the garden that you will likely see emerge. Now, it is never too late to nurture the garden, the focus, and the platform for your genius that you want to experience and express. All it takes is the choice to begin now. Now, beginning now, I'm going to offer you a perspective. Doesn't have to mean you burn your whole life down. Some people think that in order to live their genius, they must quit everything and throw everything away. I would offer you the perspective that meeting your genius can begin wherever you are at. It can begin with simple iterative steps that you layer on top of what you are already doing. And that by and by, applying these micro shifts, it's almost like subtly adjusting a telescope. By a slight adjustment in the telescope, you can actually completely change what's being focused on. You don't need to spin the whole telescope around to get a new view of the sky. Slightly adjust it. And there you go. I invite you to consider that any resistance you may or may not feel to expressing your genius in the world comes with an invitation to ask yourself, how do I imagine I am benefiting from perceiving that I'm holding my genius back? And the reason I frame it that way is we're always benefiting some way, somehow. There's always a trade-off. So pain perpetuation can be one of the ways we keep ourselves in a comfort zone. Even if that comfort zone is full of pins and needles, at least they're familiar pins and needles. And so in this way, if there is any place in your life where you feel a resistance to embody your genius, you might ask yourself, what is the benefit I imagine I am getting from being in the resistance? Because that will reveal to you what is actually being held on to. Because once you start having that awareness, then you can start having a conversation within yourself to say, well, is there another way I can go about this? Or perhaps I don't actually believe that I need to hold on to this resistance anymore. Many times awareness is the first key step to shifting something. Because we don't shift effectively anyway through resisting something. I find that the most empowered way to shift is to get yourself curious, on board, and energetically a full yes to the direction that you want to step forward in. I will affirm, living your genius is within your scope right now. It is not something that you must fight for, at least not from my perspective, but it is something that you might consider tenaciously saying yes to. Being so persistent in your yes and with it, that it is inevitable that reality shifts to align with the perspective that you know to be true within you. And remember, your genius isn't about proving that you are something. Your genius is about the full permission to be the full empowerment of what you already are. And you get to discover that moment to moment, experiment to experiment, iteration to iteration. I invite you to experiment in your life. If you are looking to experiment with others who have the same vision, the same energy, please check out the Self Alchemy Lab. We co-created it as a place for people in this level of exploration empowerment to play, to navigate together, to envision and amplify their envisionings. Create communities locally to you. Meet those who are ready to meet with you. My friend, I'm inspired by your choice to continue to step forward in all the ways that you are in this world, in this life, and in this path. Thank you for being as you are. Thank you for showing up in the ways you're showing up. Your genius is ready to express in this world. And I see you living it fully. I look forward to our next conversation.